Hello, everyone. I would like to extend a warm welcome and a thank you to all of you joining us today. My name is Jeanette Stewart, and I'm the founder of Translation Commons. We are excited to host today's celebration of International Translation Day in partnership with the International... Hello, everyone. I would like to extend a warm welcome and a thank you to all of you joining us today. My name is Jeanette Stewart, and I'm the founder of Translation Commons. We are excited to host today's celebration of International Translation Day in partnership with the International... Hello, everyone. I would like to extend a warm welcome and a thank you to all of you joining us today. My name is Jeanette Stewart, and I'm the founder of Translation Commons. We are excited to host today's celebration of International Translation Day in partnership with the International... Okay, I am stopping this. I would like to extend a warm welcome and a thank you to all of you for joining us today. My name is Jeanette Stewart, and I'm the founder of Translation Commons. We are excited to host today's celebration of International Translation Day in partnership with the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. Today is a celebration that brings recognition to the skillful work of translators and interpreters behind the scenes in countless environments. Indigenous translators and interpreters are helping their communities to navigate issues regarding health, safety, civil rights, mobility, livelihood, education, climate, and so many more. And yet they face unique challenges that we would like to acknowledge. We are honored today to have the participation of experts from various fields who will share their knowledge and experiences. We are honored to have a wonderful volunteer staff that is producing the event. And we are grateful to each and every one of you for your time, energy, and thoughtful participation. Our first guest opening the celebration of International Translation Day is Mr. ITD2023, who is Chief of Universal Access to Information at UNESCO in France.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and distinguished speakers, thank you for this opportunity to open today's webinar on the International Translation Day. I am delighted to welcome you all to this remarkable online event and to celebrate the International Translation Day under the theme, Unveiling the Many Facets of Humanity. Today's event will explore the multifaceted dimensions of translation and its profound impact on our global community. Further, it will provide a critical context by exploring the power of dynamics within translation, particularly concerning Indigenous languages. The act of translating Indigenous languages is an act of profound responsibility, one that requires not only linguistic precision, but also an understanding of the cultural sensitivity and ethical considerations. We must recognize that translation of Indigenous languages is a unique and delicate endeavor. It carries with it the weight of preserving ancestral knowledge, traditions, and cultural nuances. It serves as a lifeline for Indigenous communities, helping them to maintain their identities and pass down their heritage to future generations. Translation is not merely the exchange of words from one language to another. It is a bridge that connects cultures, fosters understanding, and unveils the rich tapestry of humanity that lies beneath the surface of language. We will also delve into the theme of technology and translation, exploring the ways in which cutting-edge technologies are reshaping translation practices with a specific focus on Indigenous languages. digital communication is crucial for the preservation and promotion of indigenous languages, especially as younger generations embrace technology. Failure to adapt to digital formats may lead to the further marginalization and eventual disappearance of these languages. Therefore, translation plays a significant role in the preservation, revitalization, and dissemination of indigenous languages. It allows indigenous communities to access resources, knowledge, and information in their own languages and fosters cultural exchange between indigenous and non-indigenous communities. Language is a fundamental part of being human and a key means for people to access culture, justice, education, healthcare, and many other fundamental rights and public goods. Indigenous peoples around the world have been marginalized, and as a result, their languages are in danger of falling into disuse. Indigenous languages represent the very essence of diversity, embodying unique worldviews, histories, and cultural identities. Yet, these languages often find themselves at the margins, struggling for recognition, preservation, and revitalization. Reasons for language endangerment for indigenous peoples vary across different communities and locations. Indigenous peoples experience challenges connected to colonization, imperialism, educational disadvantage, forced migration and relocation, and other forms of outright or systematic violence. This has consequences for indigenous people's civic and human rights, for cultural diversity worldwide, and for centuries-old knowledge and know-how that could be decisive in humanity's efforts to solve the challenges of this century, including climate change and biodiversity loss. In the global context, as we increasingly recognize the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is imperative that we extend these principles to the realm of translation, especially for indigenous languages. UNESCO, together with other UN agencies, are currently working on building a global community for the preservation, the revitalization, and support of indigenous languages worldwide. The International Decade of Indigenous Languages is an important opportunity to strive towards a world in which indigenous peoples will entrust their languages to future generations, creating a better society for everyone. The decade is currently in a scale-up phase, and we wish to draw global attention on the critical situation of those many indigenous languages and to mobilize stakeholders and resources for their preservation. Today's event is also taking place under the auspices of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. The scope of work envisaged during the International Decade of Indigenous Languages is beyond the capacity of any simple nation, country, stakeholder, group, generation, scientific discipline, policy framework, or set of actions. The International Decade of Indigenous Languages presents a framework for convening a wide range of stakeholders collectively to align their efforts and accelerate development plans. For these development plans, a multi-stakeholder-driven approach is instrumental in translating the global priorities, international standards and practices into accountable initiatives, specific policies, and implementation frameworks. I would like to extend an invitation to all of you to join our ever-growing International Decade of Indigenous Language community. We have activities being coordinated by a network of 1,721 organizations and 2,204 organizations. This community can only grow, and we hope you can be part of it. To promote visibility and encourage actions at a global level, UNESCO has also partnered with the Brazilian author Victor Santos to co-publish What Makes Us Human, an illustrated children's book about languages. The book raises awareness about the preservation of everyone's mother tongue and is promoting explicitly the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. The book is currently being translated into more than 18 different languages. Let's celebrate the power of translation. Thank you, Translation Commons, for organizing this event. May it be a source of inspiration for us all, and happy International Translation Day. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. Moving on with our opening remarks, we have Dr. Udaya Narayana Singh, Professor of Amity University, Haryana from India.
Hello, good morning and good evening to all. I'm actually welcoming you to the International Translation Day event, which is full of very interesting discussions. And the focus this year is many faces of humanity, translation and interpretation in indigenous languages. Now we have two special panels here, one on power dynamics and another on technology and translation. As I was thinking of the topic, I recalled that almost all scriptures that we have in our tradition, the God is a monolingual God. One doesn't know whether this God speaks in ancient Greek or Latin or Sanskrit or Hebrew or Tamil, but surely not in one of those indigenous languages. So what are we to do when we are faced with a very large choice of languages? A lot of people will think that there is something called a pure language and something which is an impure language, because quite often in the translation power dynamics, the original text is thought to be pure and the reborn text or the translated text is thought to be, impure. Now, I think, to my mind, the translation actually takes us beyond this kind of debate. And none of these texts is superior, neither the original nor the new generated text. Actually, translation teaches us to be free and yet have a kind of bondage with the original. Now, this is a very interesting socio-political model, and to that extent, I think it is very important for us to see that as many texts as possible, which are purely oral texts available in indigenous languages, can now go to the mainstream languages. And I realize this, that it is often thought to be a curse for dialects or unwritten languages, that they do not really have the fruits of translation. There's so much of translation happening almost every day. So it should be modified. Otherwise, as the Ghalib poetry says, Ishrat-e Qatra hai darya mein fana ho jana, that as if the fate of the droplets is only to be consumed by the ocean. So in the ocean of humanity, ocean of majority languages, we should not let our indigenous languages be submerged. On the other hand, there is also a debate in power dynamics of translation, whether all the languages should be chiseled, polished, perfected, and written down. But at the same time, anybody who belongs to the indigenous community would tell you the pain of not being able to write it down, whatever you feel like, and not facing a situation where other people can read your sentiments and read your texts. So I would also say that some people may think, some elderly people may think among the indigenous groups that writing is an oppression because it forces you to do something which is unnatural. But in today's world, if our languages have to survive, all our languages will have to survive, then translation is an inability. And no, we can't really believe in the Plato's pharmacy dictum of Derrida, which where we heard that Plato had a deep mistrust for writing, influenced by his teacher Socrates, who made a virtue of writing nothing. But today, I think that's not something which we can do. Even if Ferdinand de Saussure tells us that writing has a corrupting influence on speech, we still need to write and translate. And it could be a very interesting relationship between the two sides, the melody and the harmony side, as if in the language of Rousseau. But I think our indigenous languages are very melodious, and part of the melody should reach all of us. And we have a very interesting panel on both these topics, and there are individual case studies and presentations. I'm sure you will enjoy them. Thank you.
The first session of the day is a panel discussion on power dynamics. Our moderator is Dr. Siva Prasad Rabatla. Siva is a retired professor of anthropology and currently honorary professor in CDLTR, University of Hyderabad. He is a member of the Information Ethics Working Group of UNESCO's Information for All program. He has been working on issues related to indigenous and marginal communities from a multidisciplinary perspective. Next slide, please. The panelist for this session is Dr. Ellen Emilson, also UNESCO Chaired Linguistic Policy for Multilingualism in Mexico. Dr. Wakoko Wanjala, Lecturer of Linguistics and Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences in Kibali University in Kenya. And Dr. Tariq Khan, Professor of National Translation Mission, Central Institute of Indian Languages in India. Siva, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Janet. Very good evening and or good morning, because it's evening for us here. And we are having a very good panel members who are eminent in their own areas. When we talk about power dynamics, basically we are looking at power dynamics in the translation area. Now, why we have to concern ourselves about power dynamics in translation? Because who translates? How the translations take place? And what are the kinds of things that shape or alter or even negatively impact the languages? Because this is where the role of translations are very important for us to understand, and how the power dynamics play in shaping the languages or in ignoring the languages or undermining the languages. In fact, Professor Udanaran Singh has mentioned that because many of the indigenous communities do not have scripts, but they survived for centuries. Now, with a kind of technology, with the kind of power dynamics that are happening, the dominant languages and dominant cultures are, in trying to either completely, allow the languages to be diminished or ignored. There is a hierarchy of languages there. There is a kind of understanding that these languages are not, superior languages, or they are very minor and they are not good, etc. There are a lot of things. And that is attitudes of the dominant cultures, the dominant languages also impact, because the dominant languages In fact, even some of the dominant languages have been threatened now, like English, when it is imposed on some other as a kind of medium, and then everybody goes to those things, ignoring their mother tongues. So these are all issues that we need to debate today, and I would like to pose three questions, one after the other, and I would request each of the panelists, Dr. Ellen first, Dr. Vinjala second, Dr. Tariq Khan third, will answer each question, and then we'll go to the next question. And the time that we have is 30 minutes. I think it's now 25 minutes around. I think we'll be able to manage the time. Now, when we are talking about power dynamics, the first issue that we need to look at is what kind of power dynamics that each one of you visualize in translating from the minority to majority languages, and also vice versa. Dr. Lin, floor is yours. You can just briefly answer and then put your point of view.
Do you mean me, Ellen? Okay, I wasn't sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much, and good morning, good evening, and all that. To go directly to the question, first of all, I would like to mention that in order to prepare for this panel, I talked to two people whose experience in the field of translation is of great interest. One is Nelson Martinez, a speaker of Zapotec, northern Oaxaca, and an applied linguist and researcher of the National Institute of Indigenous Languages of Mexico. And the other is Alba Sederlin. She's of Zapotec origin, not a Zapotec speaker, who holds a degree from Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz. And her thesis was about ethnicities in Mexico, multimodal texts. And she's also one of the developers of the Masters in Translation of Indigenous Languages. It was important to discuss with people who had actual real experience in the terrain. I do not speak a language yet. I will, but I'm not speaking a language. I don't speak. So anyway, the Nelson points out that in principle and commonly texts from the hegemonic language, which is Spanish, are translated into indigenous languages of Mexico, especially legal texts, health, education, and social programs. But there are very few private or institutional initiatives. And the slogan in general is, because there is a law to comply and guarantee linguistic rights, there are these translations like the Constitution, the law of linguistic rights, etc., are translated into different languages, but there is little translation for enjoyment or just general texts, and there is very, very little translation the other way around from indigenous language, from Zapotec to Spanish. And when they are translated, it's usually to insert the stories, for example, into narratives that are often cataloged according to Western genres, legends, myths, fables, when the actual origin of the genres are more contextual and more framed in context of communal educational processes, and are not seen as myths. They can be seen as realities, or they're not seen as fables, just lessons. On the other hand, Alba, our colleague Alma, comments that the language speaker the translator is expected to be a source of knowledge and a possessor of the entire language without considering differences between genres, domains of discourse, and different variants. So I would leave it at that so that others can talk.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting perspective that you brought in. I think now I request that Vanjala, please unmute yourself and
Sure.
you are not audible. You are not audible, Dr. Vanjala. No. No, you are not audible. Maybe you correct it. We'll move to Dr. Tariq. In the meanwhile, you check your speaker. Okay.
Namaskar to everyone present here. Greetings of International Translation Day to all the viewers. Coming to the first question, power dynamics is an intricate issue because power is evident in all instances of translation. Power dynamics is evident not only in cases of translations between a pair of majority and minority languages, but also in cases where translation involves a pair of both majority languages or a pair of both minority languages. So therefore, power dynamics manifests itself in the choices of text, the books, or the content that is taken up for translation, as Professor Shiva has already mentioned. And then it also manifests itself in decisions regarding what would be the strategy to translate, and then what remunerations would the translators get, the reward that the translators would get. So drawing from this, we can also say the texts that are not chosen for translation are also determined because of the power dynamics, and the punishments or liabilities or damages that are inflicted upon the translators are also based on power dynamics. Coming back to the other specific aspects of this power dynamics, especially in the context of minority languages, which are slightly different and distinct and easily identifiable, it would be good to repeat what Professor Yuen Singh has just mentioned. Scripts play a very important role, and it is not just the availability or unavailability of scripts. Unavailability of scripts is very easily understandable. If scripts are not available, it would be difficult to see how translation is taking place between the languages. But even when the scripts are available for some languages, there are different issues arising, which are all a manifestation of power dynamics. I'm exposed to the languages of India, and I would like to present some instances of this kind of a complexity arising in the Indian scenario. So if we consider some languages like Maithili, which is written in Devanagari, and it had traditionally a script called Tirhuta, and all translations today happening in Maithili are happening in Devanagari, not in Tirhuta or Kathi script. If we take the instance of Konkani, which is written in Kannada script, Devanagari script, Malayalam script, Roman script, so there are several scripts available for Konkani, and there is always a difficulty to choose which one to translate into. Then we have a similar problem for Santali, which is a scheduled language. In terms of power, it is a powerful language, but it is spoken in several states where there are official scripts. So in Bengal, Santali is written in Bengali script. In Odisha, it is written in Odia script. In Jharkhand, it is written in Old Chiki script. And then in some other places, it is written in Devanagari. So the multiplicity of script has created a problem for Santali also. Then we come to another very interesting case, that is of Sindhi, which was traditionally written in Perso-Arabic script, a modified version of Perso-Arabic script. But today, the older generation uses the Perso-Arabic script, but the younger generation might like to have the translations done in Devanagari. Now, the availability of both these scripts or several scripts has created a new challenge for challenge in translation, because these are not just issues of representation. These are not just issues of graphic kind where how we see our scripts. It's also an issue of automated systems. When automated systems are to be built, these will be translating one set of or say one form of text into another form of text. So if the tool is prepared to serve a pair of scripts, and the target language is expecting a different script, the tool may have to include several other scripts also, which will be very resource intensive and time consuming factor. Then the availability of lexical resources like dictionaries, glossaries, thesauri or translation equivalents, these also are dependent upon the power dynamics. So some languages may find it difficult to translate very useful materials because glossaries are not available in them, and in that case the unavailability of technical terms creates a problem. The translators are proficient in the languages concerned, but their main challenges are because of the absence of dictionaries or glossary items. Technological tools, which are also the availability of or unavailability of technological tools today or automated systems, has also manifested power dynamics in a very interesting way. Some languages which are supposed to be high in power, and they have a substantial number of speakers, and they may not have web utilities. So if we look at say Google Translate or Yandex, or we look at Microsoft's Bing, for a very long time we had these translation systems available in say 13 to 14 languages in India. I'm presenting the context of India mostly. These were available for say 13 to 14 languages, and several majority languages were not available. Now when they have become available also, there is a lot of problem, because in the back end there is no corpus, there is no parallel corpus. So several other problems are also there. Worldviews, because the indigenous languages have or minority languages have their own lexical items, which are results of the way they have perceived the world, and these are culturally conditioned, these are geographically determined, and that is why they may pose challenges when the translation is happening. This is evident in both the cases. I stop here.
Yeah, it's you brought in a lot of other dimensions. I think
hello, Doc. Can you now hear me?
Yeah, we will get back to after because there are other questions that can answer some of them. And now Dr. Vanjala is back. Please, Dr. Vanjala, because now your phone is audible. Mic is audible.
Can you now hear me? Thank you so much. I'm sorry for that little hitch. This is Wakoko Wanjala from Kenya. For me, translation from our part of the world appears to be a very new field of practice, simply because the predominant language that is used in the school system in Kenya is English. It has been so standardized to an extent that anytime anybody thinks of introducing any other language, they will be thought to be not properly educated. And therefore, there is all over the place, there is a very negative attitude towards the traditional languages, which have continued to be marginalized day by day. And therefore, talking about power dynamics, you now realize that we have a language that is considered a super language over these others that are considered very minor languages, and people think they are not very important languages. However, when we go to the church, which is the Christian church, you will find that the Bible was translated into the smallest of languages. But we have other important materials that also need to be translated. For instance, the constitution of the country, the various smaller constitutions of the various counties. One would expect that these are important books that should also be translated so that people down there who are not very well educated and people who are not very proficient in English can use them to also understand different kinds of aspects of life. but that opportunity has not been given to them. Myself, as a teacher of language, basically the English language, I over time gained interest in the traditional languages or the indigenous languages because insisting that English should be the medium of instruction in school leads to a point where majority of the students are left outside the school system. Majority of the things that are taught in elementary school at the very early levels of schooling, when they are taught in English, you find that majority of those learners struggle to understand. When you teach simple skills like reading, when you teach simple skills like writing, learners in elementary school struggle with them. We have always wondered why this is the case, yet when children leave home, they are proficient in their mother tongue. They are proficient in their mother language. Majority of the people who have not had an opportunity to get schooling in Kenya have their own traditions that have taught them about traditional medicine, traditions that have taught them about how to handle complex diseases or problems that occur in agriculture, animal husbandry, and so forth. But you see, this kind of indigenous knowledge is not available in print in the languages of the people. All that we read are the school textbooks that have got material that is transmitted in the English language. Therefore, you realize that the marginalized language, the biggest dynamic here is the power relations that we have between the dominant language, which is English, and these other languages, which are African indigenous languages. However, in the middle, we have a lingua franca called Kiswahili. Kiswahili is an interesting language because it is spoken throughout the Eastern Central Africa, but with differing levels of proficiency. Majority of the people who speak it very well are people who have gone to school because this is a language that is taught in the school system. But you'll find that it can only be spoken, but writing it still remains a problem because, again, levels of literacy depend on the school that one goes to and how well they have been taught this language. And therefore, I want to put it that indigenous languages provide a very interesting opportunity for our people to get information, to get entertained, to get educated. But this opportunity has not been provided. My own personal experience as a researcher, recently I did a study on how patients communicate pain to a doctor who does not speak their first language. For instance, the doctor perhaps only speaks English, or for the case of doctors who recently came from Cuba to Kenya, they could be proficient in Spanish and English, but they are not proficient in the African indigenous languages. Then how do these people communicate with their patients? Because I know that for a patient to be handled very well, they must be understood by the doctor. And getting understood depends basically on the type of language. The language must be a first language. The language must be an indigenous language. And therefore, I want to wind up by saying that we have a negative skew in terms of how indigenous languages are handled. They are on the shorter end of the stick, and we still have dominance when it comes to the English language, yet many people out here express interest that they would have liked if their written material were translated into the smaller languages of the people. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wanjala. It is quite interesting kind of perspective that you brought it from the Kenyan experience. And now we all know that in any kind of translations, the ideology of the translators also influences. So that's why I would like to pose a question to each one of you, that how do you think the translator's ideology influences the translation process? And because that is a part of power dynamics in that, because if I'm translating it from my perspective, not from the perspective of the linguistic groups for which I'm supposed to do it, because I can use my own language, my own words. So thereby, there is a kind of a power dynamics in the ideology of the translators. So I just would like to ask you, how do you look at this aspect of ideology of the translators as a part of power dynamics that you have come across? Dr. Ellen.
Thank you, Professor Siva. Nelson, my colleague, Zapotec colleague, he has done a lot of translation on both, from both directions. And one of the aspects that I find very novel that should be highlighted is that Nelson he tries to retain the communal ideology that is central to Zapotec culture. And he has, considering his affiliation to Zapotec culture, he believes in communal work and thus has developed the technique of communal translation, where different members of the community participate in the process of translation using the institution called tequio in traditional indigenous communities, where people chip in work together for building, for organizing party celebrations, and for translation. It's a very, very novel practice that he has been instituting and has been working very well. So it's being a collective process. It aims to break away from diglossic power dynamics, positioning the language in order to raise status and achieve dynamic equivalence is his aim. They see it as an opportunity to extend and adapt elements of the target language over those of the source language. It also provides the meta language with texts in order to empower it in the eyes of the public of the source text, so that they help to change false preconceived ideas about the indigenous languages of Mexico, which, although they are totally oral, does not exempt them from the written culture as rich and sufficient as any language of the world. For Alba is a professor of translation, and so she in turn uses examples of students translating oral speeches by members of the community that are taking part in government, with the aim of creating an awareness of the difficulties in participating in the governments, in the local governments, such as being a woman and holding local government positions. Because of the influence, what happens is that local governments in indigenous communities usually are not prone to accepting women in their government, but the federal government policies that are, of course, well, luckily, right, has very progressive ideas about women. There is a need to deal with the problem, and the translator of her project, we're talking about this woman who is in the master's, is an educated woman, so her role as a member of her community has given way to change. So these are, I think, two interesting examples that show how their ideology is their own, the translator's ideology and position in the community is helping to change power dynamics. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have to be a little more briefer because the time constraint is there. I would like to request Dr. Vanjala to, as briefly as possible, because keeping the time in mind, you respond to that ideology of the translator as a part of power dynamics.
Thank you so much. The translator plays a central role in translation. The translator is the one who decides between, of course, the source language and the target language, what kind of terminologies will be borrowed, what kind of terminologies after borrowing will be nativized, what perhaps kinds of calques from the target language will be manufactured to fill in the gaps that may be missing in the source language. And therefore, you realize there's a lot of power play when it comes to translation. I would like to give an example of the translation of William Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice into Kiswahili as Mabepari wa Venisi. This was translated by Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, the founding president of the Republic of Tanzania. And you see, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere was a socialist politician, and he had established a system of government where socialism, or what was called in Tanzania as ujamaa, was the system of governance. And socialists had a very negative attitude towards capitalists. And therefore, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere thought that the merchants in Merchant of Venice were capitalists. And therefore, he did not even translate the word merchant the way it should be translated. He instead translated it as Mabepari. Mabepari to mean people who behave like animals, people who are ready to make profit at the expense of other human beings, people who do not share their profit with others, people who do not care about the society, people who only want to enrich themselves. You realize that from that example, or in the translation of Merchant of Venice, you realize that Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere's ideology of socialism came into play during the translation. And it doesn't just stop there. The culture of the translator is also very essential. Much as we say that a translator must be proficient in the source language as well as the target language. And if the target language is the language of this culture, then obviously the translator will try to play up that which was not very obvious in the source language, so that he also makes his language and culture to appear superior. Actually, the whole importance of translation, according to me, is also to try to give a new lease of life to a language that would otherwise die, a new lease of language to a language that would otherwise have no opportunity in the global field of languages. And therefore, I have a feeling that the ideology of the translator is very essential in this case. A translator without an ideology has no business being in translation, because according to me, translation is this business that gives smaller languages an opportunity to be heard. I remember a story of the late John Paul, the Pope of Vatican II, when he traveled to Mexico at one time, many years ago, he chose to greet a certain indigenous community of a people that had been marginalized for very many years. He chose to greet them in their language. When a person of such a high profile position in society uses the language of the indigenous people, you can be sure these people will feel good, they'll feel appreciated, and they'll also feel that they have a place in the global village. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what I want to say about ideology and power in translation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Tariq Khan, be brief, because I think this will be the last of responses, then I'll sum it up, and because next it should not affect others. That's right. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity. In addition to the selection of source text, the translator's ideology has a substantial effect on the translation outcome, entailing that the translator's ideology may play a decisive role in the choice of words, equivalents, transformations, adaptations, etc. So the translator arguably acts on behalf of the source text and the target text, and thereby becomes a kind of a communicator. And the translator communicates what the community is likely to receive as a target text. And in the process, he or she wields power over the text and the interpretation that the target language has to receive. So therefore, I would say traditionally, translators had two roles. One was the selection of the text, where the ideology of the translator played a role. The second was the choice of words for the translation for the target text. But apart from that, today's AI-based machine translation systems have brought in a new dynamics to this particular issue. That is, the translators often have to become or to act as post-editors and validators. Now here, there is a very little scope for translators to express their ideologies. That's all.
Thank you. I think we had very good kind of discussion we had. We in fact, this has reflected on divergent kinds of perspectives and the role of the translators, the kind of power dynamics in the translations, and how the marginalized and other kind of communities are affected by this are discussed. Thank you for all the panel members, and thank you, Dr. Jeanette, for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to the next topic. Thank you, Siva, so much, and thank you, the panelists. It was a great discussion. We learned a lot of things, and thank you for sharing your insights. Our next session is case studies from Indigenous communities. Our first case study is from Dr. Vicky Cousins. She will talk to us about cultural translation and cultural redreaming. Dr. Vicky Cousins is from the Kiri Wurrung Gujimara Citizen and Research Fellow at the RMIT University in Australia. Vicky?
Thank you. Thank you, Jeanette. I'm just going to share my screen. Sorry, just looking for the presentation. Oh, apologies. We had this sorted before. Just trying to find it again.
It's always the case. It goes perfect.
There. Is that what people can see? Yes?
Yes. Thank you, Vicky. This is great.
Thank you. So again, thank you all for Translation Commons for inviting me and for being here with you all today. And it's been an interesting conversation so far.
Vicky, can you present, play from start?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought I did. There we go.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I've really enjoyed hearing the different perspectives from around the world. I'm a Kiri Wurrung citizen from the Gunditjmara Nation in southwest of Victoria in Australia. A couple of maps there for you to look at. I'm not sure if anyone's seen these maps before, but languages of Australia, there's a lot. We're now talking 800 plus, counting what some people might call dialects. So there's about, I think, 300, 450 there. And the map on the right is, I'm also the chairperson of the Victorian Aboriginal Corporation for Languages, which is a state language centre. And we have about 44 languages plus some emerging dialects in Victoria. My languages are down in the, I don't know if you can see the cursor, down in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see Kiri Wurrung and those languages around there along the coast in very cold country. The language context in Australia as the oldest living languages in the world, all of our languages are critically endangered. We have different kind of categorizations around strong languages and such, but I think there are about 13 languages left in Australia that are considered strong. The definition of that meaning that they're being transmitted across generations. So, as you know, Australia was invaded by the English, and so since colonisation, the East Coast, which is in the southeast there, where we are, and along the East Coast were bore the brunt of that first impact. And so the languages, particularly in these regions in the Southeast, are in revitalisation, reclamation and revitalisation. In Victoria, there's probably about 3 languages that have a couple of elderly fluent speakers. The rest of us are working in that revitalisation context, or my definition of that, in that we're working from Aboriginal English. So we have forms of English that retain our language ways of speaking. For example, kinship terms. We use kinship terms, but we use English words, but kinship and relational language. And we have some phrases and words that have been left, or that remain, I should say, in use in varying different areas and different languages, but we don't have any fluent speakers. Myself and a few of us have a level of fluency that we've worked hard to develop over recent years. I've been working for about 24 years now. This is my dad on screen, who has passed, but I like to share. He was the one that started our language revitalisation journey back in the 1990s. And he worked with an honours linguistic graduate recommended by a senior linguist, and they gathered together the historical records, which is a lot of what we have to work with. And we're very thankful to our ancestors to have left that legacy for us to have to do our translation. I've called it cultural translation because some of the things that you have been already discussing, we're right at the other end of the spectrum where we don't have fluent speakers, but we are nonetheless translating or retranslating our language back into a living language. So one of Dad's proudest achievements was to publish our dictionary, which there's a copy of there, and that's part of our country along the sea coast. It's also called the Shipwreck Coast because a lot of the ships that came got wrecked along there. I shouldn't laugh, but it was very much a dangerous place for the old ships. I think that we're in I'm sure everyone here knows this. I talk about here in Australia when I'm getting to speak about our language contexts, that we're in a global pandemic of language loss and attrition. And some people have already talked about some of that. And it's no more, it's really, really, there's been severe impacts here, and the environment for language revitalisation hasn't been very well supported, even language maintenance. And so we're just currently at this point in time, thankfully, I think, due to the Indigenous Decade of Languages and their Year of Languages in 2019 has triggered some actual action in the space of supporting and increasing support for language revitalisation. But I know that, some of the numbers that are going around are that, like, in 50 years, they're expecting at the rate we're going with the resources that we have to address the issues, there'll be no fluent speakers left in Australia by 2050. And I just think if that is not a crisis, and the global crisis we're experiencing with languages, it makes me breathless, and it scares me, and also galvanizes me to action and speaking out where I can here to make some of those changes. Part of our translation process is working with those historical records, is looking at who wrote them down. Like, we're coming from that cultural, I was hearing the conversation just before around the two ends or the two sides of translating, and being conversant or having that ideology and cultural background and understanding the languages. But here we have to understand who wrote the things down, if they were English or if they were Spanish or if they were Dutch or German or whatever, to understand we've been talking about, their understanding of what our old people were telling them. So then we have to deconstruct all of that and then put it all back together. So there's been issues, and there continues to be issues around working with linguists in Australia in communities because of the historical experiences people have had with non-Indigenous experts coming into communities, recording languages, doing things with language and leaving, and that not being left with the community, or the community being supported with those resources. So that's sort of the first step in what, in this translation spectrum, I suppose, that when I was looking at what everyone was talking about, and I'm thinking, well, what am I going to really talk about? But I think it is important for people to understand just where we're at, and what I've got up on the screen here. So my father did the dictionary, and we've all been using a bit of that, and there's been different attempts, because nobody at this current point in time is paid to do any of this language work in our language revitalisation. So the resourcing from the federal government is severely lacking, and I'm on the National Language Policy Partnership, which has come out of the Indigenous Decade of Languages. So we are addressing those issues, but it's like about time, because the rate of attrition, the last 20 odd years of reports have just shown the same declining rate of language use and language transmission. So going from the dictionary, and we have some parts of grammar, and we have, not what you would call a full lexicon, but a good lot of a basis to work from. But, you need your grammar to be able to speak your language. You need the bits that make your language work. And I haven't completed a university degree in linguistics. I work with a linguist. I've picked up a lot of knowledge. I just haven't had time to do that amongst the work that I do. But so have been working on grammar rebuilding. And so Deborah Cheetham, who is a all-round amazing woman, Yorta Yorta woman, is also a soprano and composer, and she runs the Short Black Opera. And she went down to my country, my grandmother's country, and the elders asked her. We fought a war back in the 1840s with the invaders, and we fought for 40 years. But they had guns and things, and arsenic and other things that they used. So we kind of not lost the war, but they certainly came and took the land. Anyway, my elders asked Deborah to write an opera, and not being very, opera is opera. I'm not very well versed with opera or the likes. Anyway, Deborah went away and wrote a war requiem for peace, and it was an amazing piece of work. But it was, she then asked me to do the translation of the writing. So I undertook that with my friend and colleague, Dr. Travis Ira, a linguist and a classically trained musician and composer herself. So that was kind of like the perfect storm, or perfect ingredients, because I'm not a musician, and certainly not a trained musician, or any person that understands opera or requiems as such. So Travis brought the linguistics and the understanding of to assist me to translate and understand what a requiem and what the beauty of what Deborah had written. So then we embarked on what we came to name deep translation, for want of a better term, where we would bring the linguistic tools the mechanisms that I'm sure you're all conversant with to translating. So this is an example. I use Deborah's words, and then I find words, and in this it really was a catalyst for development of not only new words, because we didn't have a full vocabulary to be able to translate some of this, but also a whole lot of grammar. And so we spent a good 6 months or more. Yes.
We need to move to the next case.
Oh, sorry.
You have a couple of minutes to finish off.
So it's very hard to realize how much time you're taking. Thank you. So really the basic message is that I work with a linguist, but we have to go to those deep places of our own cultural knowledge to be able to bring the language back through into our cultural framework. And that requires that obviously an ideological base, but a deep spiritual and cultural base. So that's kind of how I have to work and be guided by my ancestors and out, because our languages come from the land. So anyway, I'll finish very quickly there. This is just a few quick pictures of some of the work we do in community. Sorry, I didn't have more time for you to read some of those and see that. This is a group of elders who are in possum skin cloaks, which are a very significant cultural item. Thank you. Oh, stop shares. Yes.
You're mute, Jeanette.
Thank you very much. Vicky, thank you for the lovely presentation. We all wish we know more about it. Maybe next time we can have more time. I also want to tell our audiences that we will take Q&A for both the panel and the case studies. At the end of the case studies, we have 3 case studies, 2 more to come, and then we can do a Q&A. Our next case study is from Mr. Bojan Maraj. I'm sorry I mispronounced your name. Bojan Maraj, ethnologist and documentary filmmaker from Slovenia, who will talk to us about dialect, A Trace of Memory. Bojan, we can't hear you. Please.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much.
Great. Just a second. So, hello, everybody. I am, as introduced, from Slovenia, a small country in between Italy and Austria, Europe. I used to be a designer, and then my interest shifted, and now I'm related to preserving memory and identity of Vrtojba, which is a small village where I was born. I'm interested in understanding how the process of disappearing memory, and in this case, language and dialect, takes place. I try to examine the difference between the true and fake, and of course, about, in this case, identity. Now, the question here is, why collecting? Why preserving memory in any form or shape? Why collecting artifacts, recording testimonials? In my case, why preserving the dialect of the village of Vrtojba? Actually, why preserving any memory of any village in the world at all? It's a little bit heretic question, but this is what I'm faced with every day when I'm on the ground. So this is an example of picture. Janet, if you can move to this picture. Yes. This is an example of the environment I am dealing with. People die and they leave their possessions. And all of a sudden there are stories. another one from a socialist part of when Slovenia was part of Yugoslavia. You see here, you can see the biggest award given by Tito to somebody, and today is just part of the junk. So in order to understand the context in which I'm working, let me talk just briefly about the village. So Vertoiba is a settlement along the long road in the valley of River Vipava next to Italy. First mentioned in 1200 Anno Domini, completely razed to the ground in World War I. And it has now a population around 3,000 people, a mix of industry employees and farmers in the afternoon. Dialect used to be a strong identifying element of this community in the past. The influence, of course, of the neighboring languages is particularly noticeable with words from Italian and German. So I must say that the concept of one language dominating our area or where I was born doesn't exist. We speak normally Slovenian language, Serbo-Croat language, English, Italian, German, and French. So the coexistence between these languages varies depending on what you are doing, but there was never kind of a sense of that one language is dominating us. In this sense, it was dialect far more important as a, let's say in brackets, dominating language or dominating way of communication. My intention to preserve identity is through different period of time. The reason is, of course, to get a reflection of who we are in the mirror of time. What was, for example, the village language in 1200 Anno Domini, or during Renaissance, or during period of Napoleon, or Austro-Hungarian monarchy, and so on and so on. Each time creates different kind of dialect. So when we are dealing with understanding of dialect, we must understand political context, which you were talking before. An example of a situation in First World War. If Janet, if you can move to the soldiers pictures. This is an example of the environment which used to be here from 14 to 18. This is how the place looked like. The language, the dialect there was totally different. Again, another situation, family. Family dialect is different from community dialect. It has its own minor specifics. Sometimes a way that they address the members of the family and so on. My somehow really heretic question is, I'm curious to know, how can a specific language or dialect survive after people die, after the process of fading memory starts its erosion path? This opens a heretic question, as I say. What would be the purpose of saying those languages and dialects if no one uses them anymore? Can I carry on?
Please go on.
Okay. That's the first antagonism I am dealing with. Let me explain two opposing parts of how the change is perceived from what I understand as a human being. First is the first way to understanding changes refers to the law of physics, where a constant change is the only law that governs it all. The only stability is the change, as you know. Preserving is not the case. The same principle, therefore, is applied to human existence, consequently to his languages and dialects. Second, if the second is understanding changes to human social needs. This is the second principle. The need to preserve his own memory, language, his dialect, therefore identity. So I link identity and dialect directly. This is what I learned. It's of course, dialect is a psychological and emotional response to our existence. And therefore, which law do we follow? His, her needs to preserve memory of their existence, or the law of constant change in the universe? That's the second antagonism, which I am also dealing every time I'm on the ground dealing with the past. And this is an example of how the past was and how the past is now. Two examples of a village in 1930, 1945, and so on. I will risk to give my opinion, considering that I'm not a professional in this field, but this is what I learned. So the language is, to my understanding, a tool of linking people together, a set of mechanical tools. It helps to identify members of a given community, starting with the family family circles, village, the regions, to various layers of castes and classes. A dialect is contrary, acts on the other side as an emotional tool, a herb giving flavor to food, in this case, flavor to human bonding. And you can see here, this is what it's all about, being together, sharing. This is where dialect live. This is where it is part of. Same here, different interests bond people together in another way, with using different level of language. It is also my understanding that as long as the form of the dialect remains spoken with a specific social group, there seems to be no problem. As soon as there is a need to communicate outside the group with others, the danger of misunderstanding, a potential conflict arises. So how do pinpoint a dialect without understanding the context, also political context, in which it was used? This is the time when a need for translation occurs, to my understanding.
Boyan, can I please ask you to conclude?
Okay, let me jump to the conclusion.
Thank you.
Vertoiba is a vivid example of a disappearing dialect. The old is gone, the ethnic structure of dialects has changed. How do I do? I organize events. I scan family albums, making sure that they are preserved for the future, making exhibitions, and making documentaries. Conclusion: I do understand the conflict between the law of universe and human desire to belong, therefore to preserve the memory of existence. The answer is, to my understanding, searching for the balance, preserving dialect when we can, and understanding the universe does not care for our noble needs. That's all. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Boyan. I'm sorry we had to rush you, but it does happen.
It's okay.
We have so much to share and so much to say. Our next case study is by Miss Julie Condi, an art researcher and documentarian from the Beverly Society in Papua New Guinea. She will speak to us about sacred spaces, translations, and documentary issues. Julie? You are muted, Julie. You are still muted, Julie.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Nemgulupa, everyone. Speaking from Ruango Village, East New West New Britain province from Papua New Guinea. Good morning, everyone. It's about 2 a.m. in the morning where I'm from, and we just had a little bit of disaster happening at the back. We had a volcano sort of starting to emergency at our place. So connectivity is kind of going on and off, but I'm really thankful and privileged to be given the opportunity to talk about my work here with the Bebeli speaking group of people here in West New Britain province. I'm a professional visual artist, and I've been working with the Bebeli people since 2010, mostly as an artist documenting their cultural dances and traditional stories. I came across the Bebeli language group speakers around 2016. I noticed they were quite, the language wasn't what they said it was. The people were speaking a language quite different from what they said they were supposed to be speaking, Bola language. So I realized that the Bebeli people, most recently, they recorded the language around 2012 as one of the endangered languages in the country. So there are about 5,000 speakers of Bebeli language here. And I'm speaking from a language village here, which is about close to the provincial town Kimbe. So I'll just give you a background of where I'm located and where the Bebelis are located. So Papua New Guinea is just north of Australia, and we got our independence in 1975 from Australia, and I'm speaking from the island of New Britain, which is about northeast from Port Moresby. So we're on the western side of the island of New Britain. And we had 3 different colonial administration before we had independence. So our language is, the Bebeli language has gone through a lot of changes during the period since independence and since the different colonial administrations that we had. I'm gonna talk about the sacred spaces according to the documentaries that I've been doing with the Bebeli people. Most of my work that I do is mostly dealing with, these days, dealing with the sacred dances. I've been working on the sacred dances mostly in a traditional dance called Sam Spear, which is a oral history of early European contact with the indigenous people. So during that time, I was documenting this traditional dance. It involved a lot of translation work with the people. And during that time we were documenting this work, we had to do a lot of translation along the way, working with the people. And the language is not spoken, it's not a very common language around here. It's the dominant language is Bola language. And the people here in Ruango, Morokia, the language of Bebeli is predominant Bakovi, Bola language. So the Bebeli language is sort of losing, not many people are speaking the language anymore. And then there are 3 different dialects of Bebeli, and there are 2 different, the Nakanai language and the Bola language have predominant Bakovi, and then we have the Nakanai language as well coming on top of the Bebeli language. So the language is sort of, most people are no longer speaking the language. So when we try to document the traditional dances, it's very difficult. So I noticed 3 things in sacred spaces, we have the three things that I noticed is first one is the engendered spaces. So when we're dealing with engendered spaces, that's when we cannot, as women, sometimes we cannot get into male spaces to document or get information. And then there are other in sacred space that I noticed as well is that the issue dealing with intellectual humility. So intellectual humility is where something the people have a phrase that says, I'm looking san pass in Pokpisin, which means they let the elder person does most of the talking or information, communal information for the group has to be translated by an elder member of the community. So sometimes that is very difficult when you want to document or translate work, because you have to go through someone who is the elder of the community. So you have to wait for that person. So information is not really given unless according to seniority of the family member. And then the other thing I also noticed in terms of sacred spaces has to do with influences that are sort of like education and churches that come and makes information, people withhold information in terms of documenting stuff. So you have to wait for a while, and it makes it difficult in communicating. So language becomes a barrier until we start to go over those sacred spaces. I noticed that in one way of overcoming those barriers is to look at ways where people communicate instead of verbal communication. And that's through cultural practices like dance and poetry. That's where we start to get information. Yeah, so those are sacred spaces that I've noticed in terms of my work dealing with the Bebelis.
Thank you very much, Julie. This has been very informative. Would you like to have some last minute, conclusion?
Yes, having noticed these issues, I began to realize how important it is for the Bebeli people in terms of interpretation and translation services for Indigenous people and languages in West New Britain, because in translation issues becomes very important for having access to delivery of vital services in health services and court services where women and children are concerned. And Bebeli people have truly missed out on these services because language becomes a barrier in accessing those things, those vital services. And this is shown in terms of lately what has happened to them, because the government has separated two districts and the people got caught up in it because they could not get involved in the negotiation of how their land was how their land was demarcated and boundaries set into the areas, because communication became an issue in asserting their rights over their own property. So that's how I noticed that translation and interpretation of Indigenous languages is very vital service to Indigenous people in my area. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. And thank you, all three case studies, for sharing your work and your passions. I would like to take a couple of questions we have from the YouTube audience, the streaming audience. And the first question we have is for Tarek, for the panel, actually, on power dynamics. It comes from Ransi Chepchirskir, I am so sorry if I mispronounce your last name. Do you think AI could offer a solution to these power play issues and biases from human translators? Would someone from the panel like to answer this question?
I guess yes, because in the machine translation, the scope for bias is very less, and it is slowly and incrementally turning the translators into post editors and validators of machine translated text. So there is all likeliness that in coming years, maybe 5 years down the line or 10 years from now, there is a possibility that the translators would basically be required to do post editing and validation mostly, and machines would be doing the translation where the scope for bias is very less. So maybe other panelists would have a different opinion.
Siva?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. After all, who writes the algorithms for the translations? Because it all depends on the persons who actually write in the translation, because machine, if it translates, somebody behind the machine does it. So unless and until we take note of them, our biases, if they are crept into, because many times AI biases in this thing we find gender biases, racial biases, and all that are there, because the biases are not of the machines. Biases are of the persons who are involved in the translations or who have written the kind of software for that, or whatever be the kind of mechanism that are required there. So therefore, as Dr. Tariq said, it might take some time to overcome them, but then it requires sensitizing the programmers. It requires sensitizing even the persons, because that's where the power dynamics operate. I think I'll stop it here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other answers from the panelists? Okay, moving on to the next question. It is for Bojan Miraj from Julie Anderson from our audience. It would be interesting to know some examples of which languages are used in which environments or contexts in the village of Georgia. Bojan? We may have lost Bojan. We can come back to this question. Moving to the next question. It's for Julie Condi from Julie Anderson. Are you able to share an example of something challenging you needed to translate from the Sacred Spaces dance? Julie?
Yeah, there was a time when I could not get into the men's house, which was a place for men to do. So I had to get a nephew in to have to transcribe, interview and transcribe the information for me, because it was a male's place, the houseboy, so I couldn't get in. Those are some of the difficulties when we have engendered spaces in. So as a woman, I cannot get into. So that's one of the difficulties in engendered spaces here that we practice in this society.
Great. Thank you so much. I would like to discuss a comment I also made by Julie Anderson on the power dynamics, that she is saying to us that it is interesting examples, translators helping to change power dynamics, and in Zapotec example. And we have another a member of the audience saying, thank you for noticing this. Nelson is having a very important effect on his community. Well, thank you all for participating and sharing your examples. If there are no other questions, I would like to move to the next session we have. We're a little bit behind time, but not too much. It is technology and translation. We have a list of wonderful presenters who are going to talk us about various subjects. So the first presenter, next slide, please, is Michael Wynn, Digital Applications Librarian, and he has been working on Mukurtu, the CMS, from Washington State University in the US and Canada. He's going to talk to us about language tools and translations in Mukurtu CMS.
Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Michael Wynn. I'm the Digital Applications Librarian in the Center for Digital Scholarship and Curation at Washington State University. The majority of my work centers around Mukurtu CMS, providing support, training, outreach, and working with our development team. The Washington State University Pullman campus is located on the homelands of the Nimi Nez Perce tribe and the Palouse people. We acknowledge their presence there since time immemorial and recognize their continuing connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. I also live and work on the territories of the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples in Victoria and Saanich, BC. Mukurtu CMS is a free and open source content management system and community access platform built with the specific needs of Indigenous communities in mind for curating, sharing, managing, and providing appropriate access to their digital cultural heritage materials. Our team at Washington State University develops and maintains the code, provides support, outreach, and training for Mukurtu. Mukurtu is used by Indigenous communities around the world, as well as by other user groups. It gives communities a tool to decide how to make content available based on their own protocols for viewing and circulation. Mukurtu was originally developed by Dr. Kim Kristen, Michael Jumpin-Jones, and the Warmungu community in Central Australia to meet their needs for a digital access platform. The name, Mukurtu, is a Warmungu word meaning dilly bag, a traditional safekeeping place for cultural materials. We have the great privilege to work with many Indigenous, Native, and First Nations communities as part of our development process. Their needs and feedback help guide development, refine our features, and drive our user support. There are a few core features that help set Mukurtu apart from other platforms in the content management realm. I don't have time to share these in depth today, but very briefly, cultural protocols allow for granular access to the content of a Mukurtu site, whether that means cultural materials, language, photographs, or anything else. Protocols are really the core thing that Mukurtu provides. There are extended community records for all types of material. This is the ability to provide multiple sets of metadata and narratives for any item and push back on the concept of a singular canonical record. There's a suite of import and export tools that we call Roundtrip. This supports digital return and exchange with other communities and institutions. Traditional knowledge labels allow Indigenous communities to provide user-facing information about a proper access and use of material. And finally, I'm going to speak more about the language tools that we do have, primarily for supporting language learning, education, and integration with other Mukurtu features. As I mentioned earlier, Mukurtu is a content management system that's designed to handle a wide range of formats and materials. This includes language resources, but it's not explicitly a translation tool. That said, we have put effort into Indigenous language support, including site-wide Unicode support, testing and revising the default fonts we provide, and users can always set their own fonts as well. We have a specific dictionary tool developed in conversation with language educators and language learners. We have broad support for audio and video throughout the site. And there are connections between language and cultural heritage resources, as those are truly inextricably linked together. I do also want to note that for most of our users, their languages are endangered, threatened, or effectively sleeping due to the impacts of settler colonialism. In many cases, that is due to very targeted efforts to assimilate or extinguish the culture and the language. Most sites, including Indigenous languages, do so in a somewhat limited fashion, since their users often have limited access to their language. So we see efforts to make the language as visible and prominently represented as possible, while still enabling users to navigate and learn in their dominant or primary languages. With that in mind, I'd like to take the rest of the time to show a few sites and highlight their use and representation of languages and translation. The Passamaquoddy people site, managed by the Passamaquoddy Nation of Maine, uses their language to contextualize the site, ground it in place, and honor relationships with neighboring tribes and their ancestors. On the front page, they've added a text and audio welcome in language, with a more extensive welcome on the About page, broken down into small segments with corresponding records and interlinear translation. The majority of the content on their site is built around a series of 1890 wax cylinder recordings of Passamaquoddy songs, which are the earliest recorded Native American voices. Speaking of content, the main content on most sites is what we call digital heritage items. Digital heritage items are at their core a combination of media and metadata. They move beyond the notion of one single canonical item or one record to allow for more context and relationships, and are built around a wide range of media formats. This example from the Plateau People's web portal highlights a video of Virginia Beavert from the Yakama Nation speaking in Ichiskeen about the importance of education. In addition to that video, they provided an interlinear transcription of the interview in English and Ichiskeen, and the text of both languages is fully search indexed. Next, the Araruna Digital Heritage Project works with Araruna community members in Peru to describe materials from the Spencer Museum of Art at the University of Kansas in Araruna, Spanish, and English. In this case, they chose to leave the site navigation in English, but as shown near the top of the screen, they've used our community records tool to create distinct records in each of the 3 languages for every item. Each record can be discovered independently, and then users can easily shift between them as needed. This is an example of the dictionary tool that we have, and this is again from the Plateau People's web portal. This here shows the Coeur d'Alene language. While we know that the term dictionary may not be the most precise or accurate, our community partners felt that it was a good choice since most users know what to expect from that. A site can support multiple languages and offers a variety of ways to search and filter in all represented languages. Shown here, the search results highlight the word in language, a translation, where provided, a recording of the word, and the name of the speaker who provided the recording. This site is Wioquebjigin, run by the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians. It translates as Sacred Bundle, which was inspired by the origin of Mukudu itself. This dictionary word shows one way that they have used translations within sample sentences, and also highlights the ability to directly connect digital heritage items and dictionary entries. The last 2 examples show sites that spent additional resources on custom development to extend Mukudu's tools. Here, the Ethno-Ornithology World Atlas focuses on bird names and related terms from around the world. Of note, you can see that they have a language picker tool. In this case, they are relying on Google Translate to power their interface and content translation. Finally, the Archive of Languages and Cultures of Ethnic Groups of Thailand have fully translated their site interface for a Thai-speaking audience, and the site content reflects that as well. We are currently undergoing some major development with a new version of Mukudu planned for release fairly soon. We're looking forward to including substantial improvements in options for site translation and localization, many inspired by the innovative work of our users. On the content side, we are planning to support integration with the Oral History Metadata Synchronizer, or OHMS, which has impressive transcription and time coding tools. One major consideration that we're trying to address is how best to support multiple layers of translation. Looking at that from the bottom up, the technical systems like Drupal and the other tech stack, this is generally not user-facing, and those systems do have their own translation efforts in place. Then we have the Mukudu interface. That includes things like providing language switchers, efficiently displaying multiple translations, and offering vetted translations of field names, core Mukudu terms, helper text, and support documentation. Then we have the content. The metadata, narratives, transcriptions, these are always user-generated, but we also want to ensure that it continues to display well. And finally, we are hoping to provide full translation packages in prominent languages. And as communities generate their own interface translations, we can help make them available for distribution, which is in line with our ongoing commitment to the core community of our users and our grassroots development philosophy. Thank you so much for your time. If you would like to learn more, all of our documentation is available at mukudu.org, or you can contact me at support@mukudu.org. Additionally, I've collected links to all of the sites shown and mentioned, should you be interested in learning more about those projects specifically. Thank you again.
Our next presenter is Ms. Josephine Adeti. She's the project lead of the Mubura experiment in Kenya. She's going to speak to us about translating climate knowledge into native languages. Josephine? You're muted.
Okay.
There
So,
you are.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me into this session to share about our work at LABOA. My name is Josephine Adeti. I am the project lead for LABOA for the Mbura Experiment. The Mbura Experiment is a project and an organization called LABOA. So LABOA, we are trying to pass climate knowledge, and part of the project is translating climate knowledge into native indigenous African languages. Sorry. Okay. I guess I'll go ahead. So the Mbura experiment is a word that means Mbura. Mbura is a native word that means rain in Kenya, but then now in other countries, it also means something else. Like in Tanzania, it means a leader. Yeah, so difference in translations. Let's start by acknowledging the richness of Africa's linguistic diversity, with over 2,000 distinct languages in Africa, spoken all across Africa. Like in Kenya, we have about 40 native languages. It plays a really great role in preserving culture and tradition. Indigenous African languages are more than just communication tools. They bring a sense of community among the people who communicate in it. And there is respiratories, places people stroll ancestral languages. Now, why it's important with climate change is because climate change is like a reality that not only faces communities in Africa, but also in the whole world. But its effects are always felt by especially Africans and communities, which include rising temperatures, low rainfall seasons, and then sometimes also it can cause droughts and even floods, and food insecurity, which is the top of it all. This is just a few of the challenges that are pressed by climate change. Now, the language barrier can be a formidable obstacle in the fight against climate change, because imagine if you're trying to push across, communicate about climate change to indigenous communities who have always been communicating in their native languages. Yet the materials you're presenting to them are those that are written in other languages that they cannot understand. Most probably, they are not going to take it extremely seriously. And not that they don't want to take it seriously, but because they do not understand. So we have to pay attention to how exactly we convey information. And much of the climate knowledge presently has been written in the major languages in the world, which especially English. And yeah, so there's a great need as to why we need to translate it into languages that communities can understand, so they can be able to take action in a way that they perceive it themselves. And especially to communities who don't speak official global languages, this language gap can lead to missed opportunities and also increased vulnerability, because everybody feels the impact of climate change, more so the indigenous communities that are left in the villages. But however, there's hope for this. So when we translate climate knowledge into indigenous languages, it offers numerous benefits. It empowers the communities by giving them access to information that they can save their lives and protect their livelihoods. It also ensures that no one is left behind, because when a material is communicated in a language that they can understand, they know where they can be able to step in and what action is required of them. So they're able to lead their own resilient stories in their communities. So how can we bridge this gap effectively between communities, climate change, while there's this language barrier in between them? So number one, it's community engagement, which involves translating process that fosters ownership and trust, and also collaborating with local experts. This is what we do at Lower Boa. Through the Mbura experiment, we reach out to people who are, we call them climate aware, because they can be able to understand climate materials written in English or any other formal languages, but they also have a very great degree of understanding their own local languages. So we work together with them to translate these English languages or French, like the common language, but for now it's English because we have begun the project in Kenya, into the local native languages as the locals themselves. So also this enables, like, it fosters the community to feel as they're part of a solution, which they truly are. And it also fosters that form of ownership. And also there's a multimedia and visuals. Sometimes the communities can be able to come together through this project. After the people who can be able to translate English and into native languages, they have camps where they can be able to, like, talk about climate change, its impact, and how the communities can come in. And we acknowledge that there are challenges, especially in this process of translating. Most of them is like the lack of resources, and also maintaining accuracy, which is a big thing in the translation world, because most of the time meaning is lost in translation. So there's this barrier of trying to make sure that when we translate this climate knowledge into local native languages, the meaning is not lost in them. That's one of the challenges that we are facing. And we try to overcome them by, like, making sure that the materials go through so many people in the community, and they can be able to say, yeah, the meaning is the same. So when we translate this knowledge and written materials, we make them accessible on our website, lowerboa.co, Lowerboa, I think I've typed it somewhere, lowerboa.co, so that communities can be able to understand it. But recently, with the invention of, like, ChatGPT, it makes it, like, a little bit easier to, like, translate automatically, although sometimes meaning is lost. And that's something that we still need to work on. Even after using tools like AI, we still need to, like, work on improving on them. Okay, now the future holds immense potential, especially when we have to expand, like, translation efforts, and everybody listening to this is already playing a role, even by simply streaming in to listen to what the presenters for today had to say. You're playing a great role, and you're creating a network of knowledge sharing, which is really impressive. So I urge all of us to try and consider how we can contribute to addressing the translation issues in our communities, not only for climate change, but also in other challenges that may be people face because of language barrier. So we've seen how critical translating climate knowledge is into Indigenous languages, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. And my call to action is for everybody who is in the translation environment to come together, work, and so we can translate these languages into other languages that people can understand. We bridge this communication barrier, and I believe the world will be a greater place. We all have a role to play. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josephine. Moving on to our next presenter, it is Ms. Laura Mahoney, PhD research for AYA project at the University of Limerick. The subject is generative language models beyond English.
Hello, I'm Laura, and I'm delighted to be here and present at the Translation Commons International Translation Day event. Today, I will speak about a community project known as AYA that I am currently a part of, the data collection and representing the Irish language in this project, as well as some of the exciting advancements in multilingual natural language processing (NLP) resulting from artificial intelligence (AI) technologies that are happening right now and will result from this project. The project known as AYA is an open science initiative to accelerate AI progress led by Cohere for AI. Cohere for AI is a non-profit research lab that seeks to solve some complex machine learning problems. They are committed to making meaningful progress in machine learning research through open collaboration. Those involved believe that technology is powerful and empowering different perspectives ensures responsible innovation. The Cohere for AI community is led by Sarah Hooker, previously a research scientist at Google Brain working on interpretable, compact, fair, and robust machine learning models. Cohere for AI support fundamental research that explores the unknown and are focused on creating more points of entry into machine learning research. The machine learning problems they tackle are largely focused on NLP as well as some vision and multimodal work. So, what actually is IA? Some languages have received disproportionate attention and focus in NLP. Many recent breakthroughs in language AI have focused on English, leaving other languages behind. One of the biggest hurdles to improving multilingual model performance in minority languages is access to high-quality examples of multilingual text. However, there has never been a more exciting time to work in the domain of NLP and translation. Just last month, Meta AI released Seamless M4T, a foundational multilingual and multitask model that seamlessly translates and transcribes across speech and text. IA is a global project that aims to build a multilingual generative language model. IA is open to anyone who is passionate and about advancing the field of NLP and is committed to promoting open science, ensuring that the next generation of generative AI and AI tools will be accessible to members of your communities. The overarching goal is that no language should be left behind. In January this year, the Cohere for AI community set out on this ambitious open science research project IA. The project started with a small technical team, but is now a community of people focused on data collection in the 101 languages included. At the end of this year, we want to release a state-of-the-art, open-source, multilingual model. Since the project commenced in January this year, the community are now solidly focused on data collection in the various languages, as well as numerous technical roles. By December 2015, we will finish the dataset collection and write up 2 research papers for the model and the dataset. On January 15th, the model will be trained and an additional safety procedure known as red teaming will be applied. On January 20th, there will be a launch for the model and the dataset. As I mentioned, we are now in the data collection phase, so I will talk about what this involves as well as the challenges encountered and our data collection goals. Large language models require lots of text to train. Step 1 is known as unsupervised pre-training. This is where public textual data in the form of books, online articles, and other sources in all the languages is used to train a base transformer model, which is a type of artificial neural network architecture. Step 2 is known as supervised fine-tuning. It is where the model adapts to a task you require so that it is not just an XOR generator, but actually useful for the tasks that you require. The pre-trained language model, LM, resulting from step 1, has a good knowledge of the languages included in the corpora, but we need step 2 to make it useful to do tasks. This is where the model is fed on many examples of task prompts and examples of completions to learn from, a procedure known as instruction tuning. This is why it was necessary to collect a multilingual dataset to build a multilingual language model that functions as a useful assistant. For this data collection, we are using a web interface tool. Here are some examples of the data collection web interface. Users can select a task of rating model performance as shown on the top left, where a prompt and completion are pulled from the database in the language and the user selects. The user rates and edits the prompt and completion to make it stronger, meaning better grammar, more factually correct, or a more detailed answer as is shown on the right. A second category of task is to contribute your language. So you write a prompt and completion yourself. An example is shown on the left. The third category of task is giving feedback to other users. This ensures that the highest quality of data is collected. As I mentioned, we need lots of data to fine-tune the model, as in step 2. And actually, for each language, we require 5,000 rate model performance contributions and 4,000 language contributions. These goals are very ambitious, and it has been difficult to achieve this, especially for minority languages without millions of speakers, such as Irish. For this reason, I have been focusing on gathering input from Irish speakers, promoting the initiative in NLP groups at universities, running workshops, and spreading the word on social media. As Irish is a minority language, it has been challenging to get this number of contributions, and it is still in progress. Creating awareness about this project among native speakers and finding suitable data sets to add to the language database on top of user contributions is key for minority languages such as Irish. To summarise, breakthroughs in AI have led to major technological advancements, but mainly in English so far. IA aims to expand this to 101 languages and release data and a language model in January. The project now focuses on obtaining high-quality examples of multilingual instruction-style text. In case you are interested in hearing more about IA, the project launch slides are available with extensive information about the project. There is also a blog post summarising the project and its goals. You can scan the URL to see the webpage giving details about IA, as well as if you wish to contribute or represent your language. And there is a quick start guide available if you would like to try it or pass on the word to your friends. Many thanks for your attention, and feel free to reach out with any questions or to connect.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Dr. Tabea Deville, lecturer at the University of Limerick in Ireland. She will talk to us about climbing the digitization mountain together.
Hello, my name is Tabea Deville, and I am happy to present on behalf of the keyboards team at Translation Commons. Our presentation is called Climbing the Digitization Mountain Together. The keyboards team at Translation Commons currently consists of 5 members with different roles and backgrounds. We have 3 main goals. 1, we want to develop keyboards for as many languages as possible. 2, we want to enable others to develop such keyboards. And 3, we want to enable others to train more keyboard developers. For this presentation, I will talk about first what language digitization is. Then I will give an overview of keyboard development, what it involves and what makes it challenging. And finally, I will talk about the Translation Commons Keyboards project. Keyboard development is part of the larger concept of language digitization. Language digitization involves a series of steps that need to be undertaken to enable a language to be present in the digital space. At the most fundamental level, this involves the encoding of the writing system in, for example, Unicode, so that it is actually possible to display all the characters that are part of a script for the language and to store them. At the next level, we would then have the development of keyboards. That is, as you know, the focus of our team, where you would then enable someone to actually utilize these characters through a keyboard. There are many other steps that follow after that, such as the definition of cultural conventions or the development of linguistic data. That might include the development of dictionaries or parallel aligned data in order to be able to use language technology. There are many organizations involved in this area for different aspects of it that include, for example, Translation Commons, but also research institutions and so on. So as you know, we are focused on keyboards, and I won't actually be talking talking about these other areas for the rest of the presentation. Before we continue, I just want to clarify that when I talk about keyboards, I do not talk about hardware, but instead of software. As you are likely aware, you can enable a number of different keyboards that come with your operating system, maybe on your laptop or on your mobile phone. However, not all the languages of the world are available with the standard operating systems. So we are working on expanding this and providing more of those software keyboards. As I already mentioned, keyboard development is an early stage in language digitization, and it is a very fundamental and foundational challenge that needs to be considered. If it is not possible to type text in a particular language, this means on one hand that people will not be able to exchange conversations with each other, for example using text technology or messengers. They will not be able to create content in their own language and actually maybe document their culture in a written form or share knowledge. But it also means that, for example, government bodies will not be able to give them information in this digital format, and they will have to find less convenient or slower ways of communicating with a particular language community. In keyboard development, we use software that aids in the development, for example, Gboard or Keyman Developer. There are a number of challenges. Some writing systems are very complex and pose challenges that are inherent in the way that characters get combined, or they might be right to left languages or languages that are written from top to bottom. There are also some that are seemingly easier, and they are easier in a lot of ways, such as alphabetic languages, but still there are things to consider, such as limited space on the keyboard. We only have a number of keys on any keyboard, and then we need to consider which are the most important keys that need to be taken by important characters, and that depends on things such as frequency and ergonomics, but also potentially conflicting key combinations. And then we need to consider whether there are language varieties in an area that might have different needs depending on the orthography, for example, for that particular variety. Here's an example of some design decisions I made myself recently when it came to designing for the Kisi language. And they were, of course, well-intentioned, but maybe not as good as they could have been. So I learned that there are certain characters that are present in the English alphabet, Q, R, Z, X, J, that do not appear in the Kisi language. At the same time, there are certain characters that the Kisi language includes that are not actually present in the English alphabet. So my idea was to take away the characters from the English alphabet and put them on a control layer to allow people to type their Kisi characters very easily by having them on the main layer, which you can see on the top left of the screen. And then having the characters, they would only need to type the occasional English word, for example, on a control layer. So this was a good idea in principle. However, what makes it not so great in terms of design decisions is that I forgot that this would mean that, for example, the cut function, so Control X, would not be available on a Kisi keyboard because Control X will yield just the X being typed, but it will not actually allow for text to be cut. So as you can see, there are many different potentially conflicting design decisions that come in when it comes to designing even a relatively straightforward alphabetic keyboard. At Translation Commons in the keyboards team, we develop keyboards based on requests we receive, and it is an iterative process based on feedback. Usually we work directly with language activists or representatives of the language community. Below are a number of languages that we have completed or that are currently in progress. We have also started to focus a little bit on developing training within the keyboards team. Our goal is first to empower language communities to develop and adjust their own keyboards. This is very important because it puts the power to control the language digitization process or parts of it into the hands of the language communities, and they can make their own decisions on what works for their language, or maybe even alter what they have at a later point. It also means they don't have to wait for anyone else to actually create a keyboard for them. Our second goal is that we want to involve more keyboard developers so that we are able to develop more keyboards, and we want to train trainers who are able to train nearby or related communities so that they can also develop keyboards and teach them how to use the keyboards. So on the whole, our goal is to get more people involved so that eventually all the languages of the world might maybe have a keyboard of their own. Currently, we have a series of 6 videos which were recorded during internal training given by Craig Cornelius and Tex Texan. They are available on YouTube, and you can watch them whenever you want to learn more about how to make a keyboard. We are also working on a training program that goes into more depth and has some hands-on exercises for future keyboard developers. Finally, we're working on a workshop with students at the University of Limerick. This will be a full-day workshop in October, and we're very much looking forward to seeing how the students will learn to make keyboards. If you have found this topic interesting, we would like to invite you to get involved with us. Maybe you have a keyboard that you would want to be developed, or you know of a language community who wants a keyboard developed. Maybe you also would like to learn how to start developing keyboards, or you would like to be a trainer that helps others to learn how to make keyboards. If you are interested, here is a URL that you can follow and an email address where you can reach us. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.
Our next presenter is Ms. Alison Rodriguez. She is president of the International Federation of Translators. She is located in New Zealand, and she will talk to us about outsourcing our humanity, which is part of this year's theme for the International Translation Day.
Good morning. I'm glad to be with you again on the occasion of International Translation Day to highlight once more the important role that translation plays in an inclusive, diverse, and multilingual world. Now, my name is Alison Rodriguez, and I am the president of FIT, the International Federation of Translators, and I hope you know who we are, but just in case you don't, we are the Global Federation of Associations of Translators, Interpreters, and Terminologists. And today, I would like to talk to you under the auspices of our International Translation Day theme for 2023, Translation Unveils the Many Faces of Humanity, in praise of human agency. The scholar J.D. Niles felt that, as a species, we should be known as Homo narrans rather than Homo sapiens because of our deep need to narrate our stories, to use them to create our realities. Stories are the essence of our humanity, of our human imagination and expression. For millennia, we have lived, shared, communicated with, and our societies have actually revolved around our stories. The translator's role is to unlock and amplify the world's stories. Translation also helps to preserve cultural identity, Indigenous language survival, and promote cross-cultural understanding. By making literature and other cultural works accessible, translation helps to create a more interconnected and diverse world where humans can appreciate and learn from each other's cultures. So our profession is important in preserving the past, but also in shaping the future, because the future is human-led, just as the last 200,000 years have been. Now, just because our preferred methods of communication may have changed, doesn't mean that we intrinsically have. These changes have been very recent in our history and happened very fast. So it's just possible that we haven't quite evolved to keep up just yet, which may be why we can't quite get our heads around what's going on with the new technology. These days, we're talking to our devices as much as we're talking to each other, And I'm not going to be oversimplistic and say that technology is bad, because obviously the reality is much more nuanced than that. But technology isn't inherently bad. In fact, it's quite useful, but it might be bad for us, especially if we don't understand it or use it well. Technology comes with risks, but it has no warning label. Many are signing up to the idea of artificial intelligence as inherently good and that its use is going to be inevitable. And they're happy to relinquish control for the benefits. And that's where our human agency comes in. It's in our hands to make decisions about the future, about what kind of world we want to build and live in, and what place humans and machines will occupy in that world. Are machines just a human substitute? As I said, we're talking to our devices these days as if they are human. Now, the anthropomorphism of technology has its roots back as far as Leonardo da Vinci and in the automata that go back as far as ancient Greece. Here you can see a robot designed in 1495 looking very much like a person. And the fact that our machines now also sound like us is celebrated. And the idea of having a relationship with artificial intelligence sounded quite frankly bizarre in 2013 when this movie came out. But now people really are having romantic relationships and forming attachments with chatbots. The language of artificial intelligence pretends to be human, simulating emotion by using I and we as if they were like us. But AI is not sentient, and its awareness and feelings are simply simulated. Of course, it has no feelings, and it's simply statistics at scale. And we shouldn't let the language that it uses mask that. The very human skills and knowledge that have served us well for millennia and will serve us well into the future, such as logics, ethics, philosophy, empathy, and creative thinking, and in the case of translation and language specifically, analysis, context, fluency, and style, may be present in artificial intelligence, but not quite like they are in human intelligence. You might be led to believe that they are by the language that they use. We even talk about artificial intelligence in terms of the physiology of our own brains, neural pathways and networks, etc., as if it has a brain. Now, artificial intelligence output often highlights the difference between being good at language and being good at thought, because communication via language is separate from the act of thinking. The human brain processes each in a different part of the brain. Now, speaking is not the same as thinking, which is why, as Matteo Wong so eloquently put it in the Atlantic magazine, AI programs excel at writing grammatically superb nonsense. It's as if artificial intelligence only has one part of the brain and not the other. If the language sounds human, we will believe it to be reliable because humans use language to communicate thought. Now, there are examples of people being misled by chatbot advice because it sounds authoritative. Deepfakes are a form of exploitation and appropriation. This use of first-person pronouns and seemingly human expression may lead people to be financially or emotionally defrauded by thinking that the algorithm is another person. We need not outsource our essential humanity using machines as a substitute for people. They're not the same, and moves to label artificial intelligence in order to distinguish it from humans are underway. Language is a good place for that to start. There's been calls to ban the use of first-person pronouns in chatbots, which would be a distinct marker between what is human and what is not. We can use artificial intelligence to do so much for us, but what good is it if we don't use artificial intelligence to solve the problems that humans care about? Will bots fundamentally care about the people that they interpret for? And is that something that's important to us? Because we know that often, and perhaps without fully understanding or considering the consequences, immigration officials will, under pressure, use machine translation. Now, there's a lot of subtext in interviews with traumatized individuals. The silences, the nonverbal language, can mean as much as the words that can't be uttered. And how will AI navigate that successfully? Without access to the knowledge that is not digitized, we could end up in a feedback loop that amplifies exclusion, especially of traditional knowledge and Indigenous languages. It makes what is digitized all the more important. Now, last year, I mentioned the Indigenous language radio station in New Zealand that is fighting to keep control of its data, knowing that the digital store that it has is an essential and valuable property. Here again, the problem is not the technology itself. The technology has given them access to huge language data and knowledge, and they're fighting to protect it from ring fencing or appropriation. Sustainability helps to push back against the idea that the future is what happens to us and not what we create. The Sustainable Development Goals are a blueprint for human agency. And these two words are the most crucial in our project for the future of the profession: human agency. We cannot forget our human condition, our humanity, and we cannot renounce our agency to technology or big tech firms. It feels as if in today's world, technology and efficiency and possibly money are all that matters. But what about what is good and what is right? What about the people? Culture and communication are about all that enriches human life and not just about efficiency or increasing GDP. Because building a sustainable, inclusive, and human-led future requires us to exercise agency, to know ourselves and not be distracted or deceived by technology as a mirror image of humanity, and to have access to all the narratives of humanity in all its facets that are revealed to us through the translation of our stories. Thank you.
And this very thought-provoking presentation was the last of our session for technology and translation. We do have one question from the YouTube audience addressed to Laura. Rancy Chepchirchir is saying that he enjoyed incredible talk on Aya. Do you think using synthetic data could be considered as a solution to the insufficient data needed for fine-tuning to improve performance? What would be the effect of this? Laura?
Hi, thank you so much for the great question. That's a very interesting question indeed. And to me, I think that synthetic data is like certainly a very good way to assist the collected data, and we will be using like machine translation on like taking, for example, like English data sets and converting them to the different languages. However, I don't think this is a very good substitute because each language has its own like proverbs and stuff that just don't translate or rooted in the culture of the country and the language. So I think that while this could assist with data collection, it's certainly not as good as having data from native speakers. I hope that answers the question.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura. There is another question for Alison, but Alison unfortunately is not here, but I will pose the question in case any of the other panelists would like to answer it. In the case of ChatGPT or AI, how does one navigate challenges around context and expression when for some English words, there are no equivalent words in certain languages? Would someone at the panel wish to address this issue?
I can.
Yes, Josephine?
For us, we use ChatGPT sometimes to translate the climate knowledge into native languages, but the accuracy is not exactly 100%. So to address this, we work with the local communities, someone who understands both languages and also the people in the community who are very deep into that language itself, to redo go through the materials again to see if the translation is right or if there are areas that can be improved. That has worked for us, but hopefully there'll be something more better. Yeah.
Can I just add to that I think that this is why synthetic data will never be as good as data collected from people.
Thank you. I just want to add one little thing that I worked on a huge synthetic data project recently. And in order for the data to be appropriate, it had to have a lot of human input. So as everybody has said, synthetic data is good for certain things, but not for everything. Now, moving on, we would like to go for our closing address. Mr. Tex Texan, he is Globalization Architect, and he's on the Board of Directors of Translation Commons. He's in the US, and he will give us the closing address. Tex, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeanette, and hello, everyone. I will try to keep my remarks short. But first, I just have to say how excited and inspired I am by this particular event. We've had so many great speakers and so much great content between the two panels and the case studies. It was a very stimulating discussion. I was excited to learn about the technologies, Makurtu, the impacts of automated translation, the keyboard development, and especially Alison Rodriguez's talk about the dangers of AI simulating human language and the gaps in those facilities. However, I do think I'll ask the organizers, next year, we need a rebuttal from some of the AI programs. We can have them come on here and talk about why they're not so dangerous. So I'd like to share a few of the takeaways from many of the speakers. I can't recap the entire conference, but there were a few things that were very important to me. And I would also like to encourage our audience, if you had takeaways or particular insights that the event brought to you that were significant for you, add them in the chat as comments, either on YouTube or however you're watching. And we can offer to collect them and then share them with the speakers, and maybe also post them on our website. So I think that would be interesting, because I'm sure all of you came away with ideas and concepts that you didn't have before. I think I thought it was interesting. Jaco gave us a keynote and kicked off the event with his discussion of the importance of translation, the effect on marginalized communities, and how UNESCO is working in the space of preservation and revitalization of languages for a better society. And he referred to the framework of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages to create plans and actions to accomplish this. And then I was also glad to hear from Vicky Cousins, who said that IDIL was actually helping in the space that she's working in. Although even with that aid, it's not enough, and she was concerned that she would have no speakers of the language in by the year 2050, unless we do even more. So it helps to put into context the importance of the work of preservation, preserving languages and revitalizing them. We had several great discussions. I think Ellen did a good job of talking about how translation tends to be mostly from the majority language to minority languages. And that means that whatever authorities think are important. I think Manjala also talked about how in education, it's just the things that you learn in school. And it doesn't include poetry and cultural information, except whatever the majority might think is important as lessons, for example, from majority culture fables and teaching them as lessons, but it doesn't go the other way. And then I thought it was great that we heard from Ms. Kandi, who was talking about poetry and dance, and in a sense that's a way to combat or provide a contrast to that and capture ideas about culture and language by sharing the poetry and dance of a community, rather than, and as a way to not have just what the major languages and major communities are offering in terms of translation. Tariq talked about, the difficulty of languages that are recorded in multiple scripts. It's a divide among generations, and it's a problem for automation because it requires additional resources, and it makes it difficult to produce dictionaries and glossaries, and you often don't have a large enough corpus in order to create translation tools. And the other point he made was it is how translators are rewarded influences their work. And all of us that have been interviewed and applied for a job know that sometimes you cage your answers in the context of the job you're looking for, the culture of the corporation, or the person who's interviewing you, and it tends to subtly and maybe not so subtly affect your answers and the information you provide. So you can see how a translator who is working between two markets, and especially for looking to get more work for the major language communities, might adjust the translations in a way that is more compatible for those markets. I thought those were interesting points. Let's see. So I like I thought Wakoko Wanjala had some great examples. His example of the effect on medicine and being able to translate that. But I will forever remember his example of the Merchant of Venice and how that was radically changed, essentially. So I thought that was an important point. And for all of you that listened to it, and if you missed that session, go watch the YouTube video after it's posted, because that was a truly amazing example. We also heard about how oral languages are not accepted as significant as written languages. They're not perceived to be as rich or as authoritative. And this can be this and the role of women in society were a couple of points that were brought up, and how women's influence may not be taken as significant. And an amazing point that Tariq had made was that as we use AI to translate, their translators are actually reduced to post-editing. And because they're just post-editing the text that's in front of them, they're not introducing their understanding and point of view of what the source was saying and how to map that to the target language. And so that is perhaps a significant loss of a check on the translations and its accuracy and quality, but also on the role of a translator removing that responsibility. I think that's something that we all need to think about. I liked very much listening to Boyan Maratz and his talk on preserving memory and identity, and I think I would compare him to a geologist or a paleontologist, looking at the different layers of sediment in order to understand the evolution of language and culture, and recognizing that the environment can be changing, and the actual structure of the constituency is changing, and you can't just look at it as one big mountain, but you have to look at the individual layers. And I think he did a great job of communicating that. So I could share many more points, but I think this conference was really striking. I think we've had a recent event a month ago, and then we had an International Translation Day event a year ago, and this one has excelled beyond the successes of those two events. So I want to thank all of the speakers and the panelists. You can see here the list of them. You guys did a fantastic job, and I learned so much, and I'm sure our audience is going to be very appreciative. That's the full list. We also are intending to create additional events going forward. If you're interested in helping with these kinds of events, whether it's as a speaker or help us organize or finding content and ideas to present, I would welcome you to come and contact us. I will show some of our social media links at the end. You can also send an email. You know, this is all put on by translationcommons.org. If you send an email to Krista, Krista, Krista at Translation Commons, with your thoughts or how you would like to help or what you would like to see us do, that would be great. I would also, we'll come back to that slide. Besides the presenters, I would like to mention, as you know, we're entirely volunteer-based and a nonprofit organization. So our volunteers are very influential in driving the activities we create. You can help create events around the topics or communities where your interest lies. If you go to translationcommons.org, our website, you can also see the other activities that we're sponsoring. Producing guides for language digitization, creating keyboards for Indigenous communities, and the like. So there are plenty of opportunities for all kinds of volunteering. With that, I've already thanked the speakers. I would like to thank our event steering committee. It's a tremendous amount of work to put together an event like this, finding the speakers, identifying the topics, organizing the technology, whether it's Zoom or YouTube, and so forth. And so many thanks to the many people who work behind the scenes to define this event and to make it happen. It's a really wonderful event. So thank you. And also, besides the steering committee, let me thank all of the contributors. I think we have another slide with, those are the coordinators. Is there another slide with, it's a long list of people to thank, so I won't read all the names. Although I'll call out Alan Melby, who's providing the event hosting and infrastructure support. Thank you, Alan, for that, and to everyone else. So I think we can move to the next slide. Here are all of the, or most of the social media where you can contact us. We would love to have your comments on this event. Give us your feedback. It would be very much appreciated. We hope you all enjoyed it. I know I thought it was tremendous. With that, this event has come to a close. I However, our work on the International Decade of Indigenous Languages is ongoing. And with your help, we look forward to continuing that effort and marking our progress next year and every year on this date until we can host this event with simultaneous interpretation and transcription in many Indigenous languages. Thank you all for attending and for your support. Well done, everyone.